Thanks a lot for staying with us. It's day 10 of Israel's offensive against Hamas terrorists. Shocked by the assault on towns and villages, Israel is carrying out the most intense bombardment of Gaza it has ever seen and has imposed a strict blockade and is preparing for a ground invasion, we are being told. Hundreds of metric tons of aid from several countries have been held up in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula for days, pending a deal for its safe delivery to Gaza and the evacuation of some foreign passport holders through the Rafah crossing. Israel has denied reports that it has agreed to halt fire in southern Gaza Strip to allow the Rafah crossing to open. Meanwhile, Israel is also planning to evacuate civilians who live in towns up to 2 kilometers from the Lebanese border amidst repeated rocket and missile attacks by the Hezbollah and allied Palestinian factions in recent days. Take a look, though, at the latest statements that have been made by both US President Joe Biden, Israel's staunch supporter, that have hinted that maybe they are trying to caution Israel over what happens next. So while giving an interview to a US-based channel, Joe Biden, the US president, said that Israel is signaling for a ground invasion of Gaza, while the Israeli envoy to US, Michael Herzog, said that there is no desire that Israel has to rule over 2 million Palestinians. Now, this is because Joe Biden also said it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza. That's the fear that some have. Herzog replied that Israel has no desire to occupy or reoccupy Gaza. In fact, they had voluntarily moved out of Gaza, what is today Palestine, in 2005 and had left the Palestinians to self-govern themselves, but seriously things didn't work out for them. Biden also said that Hamas should be eliminated entirely, so he is in favor of that offensive. The Israeli envoy to US said that Israel is going only after people who are engaging in barbarism. Biden added that there needs to be a path to a Palestinian state. So once again, the US balancing the aspirations of both sides. Herzog responded saying that Hamas is a bunch of cowards who are hiding behind civilians. Talking about the civilians, and of course, that's the big question in everybody's mind. Nobody really wants a large-scale civilian crisis or certainly deaths. But according to the UN Humanitarian Office, already there is a big question mark. Fuel reserves in Gaza hospitals may last just about 24 hours. Over 2,500 people have been killed in Gaza so far. There are about 10,000 people that are considered to be wounded, and of course, remember, several have been displaced as well. More than 1,000 Gazans are still missing. Now, this is the situation. But Israel says that they have been urging Gazans to evacuate. They've been distributing leaflets, doing whatever is possible to ensure that civilians' lives do not become collateral. But Hamas is also known to tell people to ignore Israel's messages and stay back. And this is why they get the accusation that they actually use innocent Palestinian civilians as shields. They are the ones who hide behind civilians, not the Israelis who attack civilians. The IDF, remember, has also confirmed that about 199 Israelis and foreigners have still been held hostage by Hamas. And one of the most poorer parts of the commentary on this entire situation has been that even those who've been batting for the Palestinian cause are not urging Hamas or are not telling Hamas to release those hostages as a sign or a gesture of peace. Instead, clearly Hamas is using those hostages and other civilians, Palestinians, as shield. Is that not the accurate statement to make? We'll take that with our guests joining us. First up, a special guest joining us. Tamar Schwarzbard is head of digital operations of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Tamar, thanks a lot for speaking to CNN News 18. It's been a week, a harrowing week for Israelis, more than a week, and you're preparing for what seems like a ground invasion. There are questions being piled on the government response in Israel after what happened on the Saturday that we all witnessed. But I do want to understand from you, what is the message that the Israeli government wants to give to the world that is worried about the civilian casualties in Gaza because of this counteroffensive?
So first of all, Shivani, thank you so much for having me here today. I think from our perspective, it is important for us that every single person around the world knows what's going on here in Israel. I cannot even describe to you the images that I have seen over the past week. They are things that I never in my worst nightmares thought that I would be seeing. Children burned alive, women raped, babies murdered in their beds, in their homes, families executed. And I think right now our goal is to return the security to the citizens of Israel who for the past week have been living their worst nightmare.
Israel, of course, has been telling people in Gaza to evacuate. But, there are concerns that there is nowhere for them to go. In this situation, what are the assurances that the Israeli government is willing to undertake and give to the world that while they have support for this counter-offensive, they will avoid mass civilian casualties? That's the question that the world is asking.
So it's an important question, and I understand the importance of the question. I have to say that we as Israelis will do everything in our power to keep civilians safe. You have to realize that the people of Gaza are being held hostage by a terrorist organization that is no different than ISIS. And we have been telling innocent civilians for days to please evacuate from northern Gaza to southern Gaza. We've been sending hundreds of leaflets from the air telling civilians on Gaza that our fight is not with them, it's with the terrorist individuals who are holding them hostage. And every single civilian in Gaza who is hurt, that is at the hands of Hamas, who is intentionally preventing individuals from fleeing the Gaza Strip. I think it is so sick and twisted that Hamas and the individuals who are responsible for the welfare of Gazan people are trying to hold them hostage and prevent them from leaving so that there are more and more civilian casualties. Of course, we will do everything in our power to protect civilians because that is our job. That is something that is extremely important to us. But every single civilian who is injured, that is at the hands of Hamas, and they are going to be held responsible.
Do you think Israel and other global powers, for example, the US, is going to be successful in opening some sort of a corridor, not just for aid, but also for civilians to move out of Palestine?
Look, I don't want to comment on the corridor. All I can say is we will work with our allies around the world to make sure that we are able to take every single precaution, available to us to keep innocent civilians in Gaza safe. But as I said before, Hamas is responsible for this atrocity. Hamas is responsible for sending over 800 blood-hungry individuals into homes of Israelis and butchering little children alive in their beds. I feel terrible for the Palestinian people in Gaza who need to suffer at the hands of Hamas, but that is Hamas's responsibility and they will be held responsible. And you mentioned the United States. I just want to say, as an Israeli, we are so touched by the support that we've received from friends around the world, including President Biden. I have to say his speech gave so many of us strength during a really, really difficult time. And I would like to see every other country around the world join the United States in condemning this horrific activity that's being committed by Hamas against innocent civilians, babies, toddlers, Holocaust survivors, men, women.
Could you tell me what is the situation as far as Israel is concerned, as you prepare, as we're learning, for a ground offensive as well? What is the situation according to you, both on the Israeli side and what you're hearing from the other side of the border as well?
Look, I'm not going to comment too much on the particulars, obviously for many, many reasons. All I can say is our soldiers are ready. They're prepared. They're going to do everything they can to keep Israelis safe and to return security to our country. And at the same time, we will do everything that we can to prevent civilian casualties on the other side.
Sure.
We have been attacked for Hamas for a very, very, very long time. And I think it's extremely sad and extremely disturbing that it took children being burned alive for the world to understand Hamas is not a group of freedom fighters. They are no different than ISIS. And the images that we are seeing from this conflict prove that.
Yet, despite what all of us saw, we've seen a lot of noted personalities, including members of prestigious groups, academia, global personalities, politicians in the US and other countries come out in support of Hamas and question Israel on this. How does that make you feel, first of all? Because we've all seen the images. What is your message to them?
I think they're extremely misguided. I think that anyone who could come out in support of Hamas really has to do some deep digging inside to understand what would allow them to be so cruel towards other human beings. Look, I am a third-generation Holocaust survivor. 4 of my grandparents were survivors of Auschwitz. I never understood how people could deny the Holocaust. And I have to tell you, for so many of us here in Israel, suddenly we understand because you see the horrific pictures online. You see people questioning the pictures. You see people having debates online as to whether 40 babies were burned alive, whether they were decapitated or whether they were just murdered. And you have to ask yourself, what kind of cruelty does it take within a person to ask those kind of questions? So for all the individuals who are standing, on Hamas's side and who are supporting Hamas, all I have to say is shame on you.
Well, I'll have to leave it on that note, Tamar Schwarzbard. Thanks a lot for speaking to us. And indeed, that is the question that all of us are asking. What does it really take? What will it take for the world to condemn Hamas unequivocally? Let me take that question also to the other guests joining us. Kalev Ben David is anchor from I-24 News based in Israel. Ashok Sajjanar is former Indian diplomat. Max Abrahams is a global security analyst. Kalev, let me begin with you. It was anticipated even 7 days ago that the tide will turn, that the overall sentiment will turn against Israel the moment Israel starts its counter-offensive. Do you sense that has already happened? And in that process, the major question is that the burden of saving civilian lives on the Gazan side is being put on Israel. You are the more powerful of the two sides, so maybe that burden will fall on you. What will you have to say about that?
Well, look, first of all, in part, I agree some of the tide is turning. I think Israel's going to try to make the case, which I will remind your viewers, that in the battle conducted against Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, ISIS, over an extended period primarily by the United States and some of his NATO allies in those countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of civilians lost their lives in that extended campaign against both Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And while certainly individual instances of civilians being killed were criticized, even condemned, nobody put a timetable on the United States and the NATO allies to do it. Nobody said it was illegitimate, that their campaign was illegitimate, even though it did cause civilian casualties. And I think Israel and its supporters in the coming days and weeks is going to try to make that case to the world. Unfortunately, as you say, Israel is held to a different standard. Its supporters would say a hypocritical standard by much of the world to deny it that latitude to carry out the campaign. Now, as Israel's taken steps, it's opened this humanitarian corridor. It's informed the civilians in the northern part of Gaza to flee to the south. It's tried to have more pinpoint bombing at this. Remember, if Israel just to open up with artillery on Gaza City, already we would have seen hundreds of thousands killed. So Israel is trying to show restraint, but at the end of the day, its goals are not only to take out the Hamas leadership, free its hostages, but basically to demilitarize Hamas. And that will be a costly campaign on both sides, including civilian casualties, and it will take some time. Okay. And yes, it's going to come under immense geopolitical pressure.
All right. Let me also go across to Max Abrahams. Max, commentators like yourself and people like yourself who've studied how terror groups function have, of course, commented on how Hamas is, no difference to a terror group like ISIS. Maybe the world is finally coming to that realization. But also about how they do use civilian areas and the civilian population as shields. And they've done that for years. On top of that, what I asked earlier as well, what's shocking is actually nobody is pressurizing Hamas to release those hostages. If there was to be a move to peace or to ceasefire, that would be the way to achieve it. But even that burden is not on Hamas. The entire burden is being put on Israel.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, obviously, the seizure of 199 hostages, that's the number that's being reported, puts a lot of coercive pressure and fear into the countries from which those hostages, correspond. Obviously, most of them are Israeli. However, I will also say that I believe that all of these hostages is somewhat problematic for Hamas as well. What exactly is Hamas going to do with these hostages? It doesn't seem like it knows how to negotiate anything. And yet, if it kills the hostages, that doesn't benefit Hamas either. There's a widespread misperception, including among academics, that more and more tactical extremeness, if you will, favors the group, favors the perpetrator. But I have a large amount of research on this, including a book. And what I find is that when militant groups escalate in terms of their tactical extremeness, when they go the ISIS route, they get the ISIS treatment. It makes it harder for supporters around the world to give money to back groups that are seen as just universally disgusting. It will strengthen Israeli resolve to crush the perpetrators. So this hostage situation is interesting, and it cuts both ways. I don't see it as helping Hamas. I think it's actually going to be an additional liability for the organization.
No, absolutely. I in no way wanted to suggest it helps Hamas. In fact, my question is the commentators who are pro-Palestine cause, and it's okay, you can be for the cause of a Palestinian state. Why are they not urging that Hamas should release these hostages if they care so much for the civilian life? Because it's a reality that hostages have been taken. And that's the inequality in the commentary that is taking place, where all of the burden to be conscientious is being put on Israel and nothing on Hamas, while people continue to defend them as well. Ashok Sajjanhar, do you think the world can come together? Because, there are also question marks on to why other countries who are bordering Palestine don't do their part. They want to keep the Palestinians boxed in.
No, absolutely. You're very right, Shivani, and I agree with all the comments and statements that you have made, particularly, in your interview in your conversation with Tamara and in the current session of our program, because, people are not talking about the hostages at all.
Yes.
And, that's very, very surprising. What I also find surprising is, Saturday is the 7th of October is not all that far away, but it seems to have completely disappeared from the consciousness and from the memory of of the global community. No one is talking about that. Everyone is talking about, what's going to happen to the civilians. And I would give it to Israel that they have been going out of the way to sensitize the civilians, tell them that you have to move out. And they have been restraining the ground offensive because they've been ready for some time, and the level of anger in Israel has been, for revenge, for going in and dealing with Hamas has been so strong. But Israel has been restraining that and giving time and extending deadline after deadline after deadline for the people to move down south. So I think the neighboring countries also need to recognize their responsibility that,
But, there is a concern, Mr. Sajjanhar, there is a concern that if Palestinians leave, they'll never be able to come back. And I think that's a fair concern, which is why maybe some of the other Arab countries don't open their borders. Although I would say that they still need to take care of the fact that civilians should move out and a solution can be found later. Even US President Biden made that comment that this ground invasion should not be to reoccupy Gaza. The Israeli Prime Minister has assured that. But don't you feel that is a concern?
No, it is a concern. I think Mr. Biden has made this point clear, but it is also my very considered view that I don't think Israel is going to occupy that land, because I think occupying that land will be more problematic. They have just said that Israel is going to decimate, to exterminate Hamas. And that is what they would like to do. And then they would, after the Hamas is gone, they would like to give this land back, Gaza Strip, back to the Palestinians or to the Palestinian Authority from the West Bank, so that they can have some sort of a government, so that they can provide decent living.
It almost reminds us of what happened in 2005, right? Yes,
exactly.
Kalev, I was going to come to you as well. Please add what you want to add, and also could you give me a sense about that ground invasion? What are you learning? How prepared or when can that happen?
Sure, but first I just wanted to add to this point. Israel is going to war against Hamas, a war to the finish, with or without international support. Let's be clear about that. That is coming. Where the international community will have to step up, especially in this region, I think will be the day after. Regarding your questions, well, there's a concern if they leave temporarily, leave into Sinai, They won't go back. But they will if they have a future in Gaza. Now, Israel certainly does not want to reoccupy Gaza, where they evacuated 9,000 civilians and all its forces there in 2005. But there will be a day after Hamas. That's the point at which the international community, especially countries perhaps like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, perhaps will be called on to take part in a reconstruction of Gaza, maybe even a pan-Arab military force to help the Palestinians hold it. That's when they'll be called on. About the ground invasion, it takes time. Israel called up 300,000, more than 300,000 troops, 300,060. It takes time to get that kind of force armed. It gets to make sure its plans are in place to get the proper intelligence. It may not be this week. It could be any day. I don't know. It may not be this week. But there is a clock ticking on Israel, as you said, in terms of the international backing that it does have from that. I would imagine it would have to be in the next 2 weeks, for example.
All right. I'll leave it at that. I've run out of time, but I do thank all of our guests for joining us and for their comments.